find a most extreme freeloader, the last place you'd choose would be 300 miles north of the Arctic Circle. Wrangel Island is not the place you'd go for a holiday. In winter, it's a freezing wilderness, and you'd risk bumping into arguably the biggest, most bloodthirsty carnivore on 4 legs. While polar bears spend the winter hunting seals, there's something that hunts polar bears. In winter, the biggest carnivore on the island is chased by the smallest. It's a freeloader that's prepared to cross more than 600 miles of pack ice in temperatures 40 below zero. Trotting in to number 8 in the countdown is the Arctic fox. The polar bear has nothing to fear from a following fox. The small scavenger's only interested in scrounging scraps from a polar bear's kill. Researchers have calculated that to survive, a polar bear needs to eat 1 ringed seal every 6.5 days. Since the skin and blubber of seals make up about 90% of the polar bear's diet, there's often plenty of meat left on a carcass for an Arctic fox. It gets a free feast without having to go to all the trouble of hunting, provided that it doesn't get too close to an angry bear. Feasting on someone else's leftovers isn't the problem for a fox. It'll eat almost anything. When one scientist analyzing the diet of an Arctic fox accidentally lost a glove, he discovered pieces of it the next day in the stomach contents of 3 different foxes. In winter, scrounging a free meal off a polar bear can mean the difference between life and death. But in summer, the situation changes dramatically. When the snows melt, polar bears find it much harder to catch seals. But for the Arctic fox, now in its dark summer coat, this is a land of plenty. With everything from fruit to nesting seabirds, there's lots of food for scavenging animals, which is why the polar bear now seems to be trailing the fox. The fox is used to being close to polar bears, but not that close. And that's why the Arctic fox is only number 8 in our countdown. It's only in winter that it depends on the generosity of the polar bear, unlike the full-time freeloaders coming up in the countdown. Number 7. The island of Komodo is home to the largest lizard in the world. But just because it's big doesn't mean it's not lazy. The female Komodo dragon is number 7 in our countdown of the most extreme freeloaders, because even though she's quite capable of scratching out a nest for herself, when it's time to bury her eggs underground, she prefers to let someone else do all the hard work. She's looking for a nest site with maximum exposure to the fierce tropical sun. Yet, like all reptiles, she can't use her metabolism to regulate her body temperature. So, by about morning tea time, she has to find shade or cook. But scorching heat won't stop the diggers that made this massive mound. A pair of orange-footed scrub fowl nest inside the world's biggest compost heap. Could there be a better place for a lazy Komodo dragon? Beneath the layer of dirt scraped up by the scrub fowl, decomposing plant matter generates heat to incubate their egg. They maintain a constant temperature inside the mound by shifting up to 100 pounds of earth every day. Eventually, these birds can end up with a mound that measures over 50 feet in diameter and weighs in at 50 tons. That's plenty big enough for a Komodo dragon. Not only is the scrub fowl's nest perfectly positioned in full sunlight, it's much easier to dig in the loose dirt than trying to burrow through a hillside full of tree roots. The dragon simply has to extend the brush fowl's existing tunnels until they're 12 feet long, with an entrance large enough for her to turn around. She needs to lay her eggs deeper in the mound because her babies require lower incubating temperatures than the eggs of the scrub fowl. During the 6-month incubation period, most Komodo mothers stand guard over their buried treasure. They won't eat until the rainy season when food is abundant and the young dragons are on the verge of hatching. Inside their nest chamber, buried deep within the scrub fowl's compost heap, the young lizards emerge from their eggs, quite capable of looking after themselves. Researchers have found that Komodo dragons emerging from nests borrowed from the scrub fowl develop faster than those hatching in holes in the ground or hillsides. It seems that this fast incubation ensures that the hatchlings appear at the end of the wet season when their insect prey is most abundant. While it makes perfect sense for the freeloading dragons, spare a thought for the poor old scrub fowl. These birds may not want a family of lazy lizards destroying their carefully constructed mound. But when you're a little chicken, who's gonna argue with a dragon? At least these massive lizards leave the birds alone, unlike our next contender.
Number 6.
One of the world's most famous layabouts was the star of Aesop's fable, The Grasshopper and the Ant. The big green bug just sat around while the ant furiously collected food to store underground. A similar story plays out on Stevens Island off the coast of New Zealand. This is home to a freeloader that, just like the grasshopper, loves sitting around basking in the sunshine. Meet the tuatara. It's the only survivor of a large group of reptiles that roamed the earth at the same time as the dinosaurs. It hasn't changed much in over 225 million years. And while this cold-blooded reptile has spent the day catching some rays, there's one hard-working animal that's been out at sea collecting food. It's the fairy prion. Just like the Komodo dragon and the scrub fowl, these two creatures have set up house together. And the tuatara is number 6 in the countdown because it lets the bird do all the hard work. Fairy prions dig burrows up to 6 feet deep into the hillside, and while the tuatara is a capable digger, researchers have found that it's happier to move into the seabird's little love nest. The prions don't particularly like the tuatara. Adult birds can usually defend themselves in a flurry of beak and claws if their housemate gets too close for comfort. So, for the first 3 months, the prions pretty much ignore the freeloader in their midst. The trouble begins when they lay their eggs. While the parents share the incubation duties, sometimes they both leave the nest together. So what's a hungry tuatara to do? Stand guard? Or help himself to some scrambled eggs? Studies have shown that tuatara are responsible for the loss of more than 25% of fairy prion eggs and chicks. So when the parents return, they find an empty nest and a fat freeloader. Fortunately, tuatara predation seems to have no significant impact on the seabird population, which is why this horrible house guest continues to eat his hosts out of house and home.
While our last 2 contenders were both scaly squatters looking for a home underground, coming up, we go searching for illegal animal immigrants looking for a home in America. And later, we meet an animal that has a party in an ear.